It's classic book talk time. America was behaving strangely underfoot. As she stepped forward, the wharf tilted upward, and she felt curiously lightheaded. Just in time, a hand grasped her elbow. "Steady there," a voice warned. "You haven't got your land legs yet." Nat's blue eyes laughed down at her. "It'll wear off in a short time," his mother assured her. "Catherine, dear, I do hate to let you go on alone. You're sure your aunt won't be waiting for you at Wethersfield? They say there's a good wife Cruff going aboard, and I'll tell her to keep an eye on you." With a quick clasp of Kit's hand, she was gone, and Nat, shouldering her trunk in one easy motion, followed her along the narrow dirt road. Which one of these queer little box-like houses did they call home, Kit wondered. She turned to watch the sailors stowing provisions into the longboat. She'd already regretted this impulsive trip ashore. There was no welcome for her at this chill Saybrook landing. She was grateful when at last the captain assembled the return group and she could climb back into the longboat. 4 new passengers were embarking for the trip up the river. A shabby, dour-looking man and wife, and their scrawny little girl clutching a wooden toy, and a tall, angular young man with a pale, narrow face and shoulder-length fair hair under a wide-brimmed hat. Captain Eaton took his place aft without attempting any introduction. Then the men readied their oars. Then Nathaniel, coming back down the road on a run, slipped the rope from the mooring, and as they pulled from the wharf, leaped nimbly to his place with the crew. They were halfway across the harbor when a wail of anguish broke from the child. Before anyone could stop her, the little girl had flung herself to her knees and teetered dangerously over the edge of the boat. Her mother leaned forward, grasping the woolen jumper and jerking her back, smacking her down with a sharp cuff. "Ma, the dolly's gone," the child wailed. "The dolly Grandpa made for me." Kit could see the little wooden doll, its arms sticking stiffly into the air, bobbing helplessly in the water a few feet away. "Shame on you," the woman scolded. "After all the work he went to. All that fuss for a toy, and then the minute you get one, you throw it away." "I was holding her up to see the ship. Please get her back, Ma, please. I'll never drop it again." The toy was drifting farther and farther from the boat, like a useless twig in the current. No one in the boat made a move, or paid the slightest attention. Kit could not keep silent. "Turn back, Captain," she ordered impulsively. "'Twill be an easy thing to catch." The captain did not even glance in her direction. Kit was not used to being ignored, and her temper flared. When a thin whimper from the child was silenced by a vicious cuff, her anger boiled over. Without a second's deliberation, she acted. Kicking off her buckled shoes and dropping the woolen cloak, she plunged headlong over the side of the boat. The shock of the cold, totally unexpected, almost knocked her senseless. As her head came to the surface, she could not catch her breath at all. But after a dazed second, she sighted the bobbing piece of wood and instinctively struck out after it in vigorous strokes that set her blood moving again. She had the doll in her hand before her numbed mind realized that there had been a second splash, and as she turned back, she saw that Nathaniel was in the water beside her, thrashing with a clumsy paddling motion. She could not help laughing as she passed him, and with a feeling of triumph, she beat him to the boat. The captain leaned to drag her back over the side, and Nathaniel scrambled in behind her without any assistance. "Such water!" she gasped. "I never dreamed water could be so cold." She shook back her wet hair, her cheeks glowing, but her laughter died away at sight of all their faces. Shock and horror and unmistakable anger stared back at her. Even Nathaniel's young face was dark with rage. "You must be daft," the woman hissed, "to jump into the river and ruin those clothes." Kit tossed her head. "Bother the clothes. They'll dry. Besides, I have plenty of others." "Then you might have a thought for somebody else," snapped Nat, slapping the water out of his dripping breeches. "These are the only clothes I have." Kit's eyes flashed. "Why did you jump in anyway? You needn't have bothered." "You can be sure I wouldn't have," he retorted, "had I any idea you could swim." Her eyes widened. "Swim?" she echoed scornfully. "Why, my grandfather taught me to swim as soon as I could walk." The others stared at her in suspicion, as though she had sprouted a tail and fins right before their eyes. What was the matter with these people? Not another word was uttered as the men pulled harder on their oars. A solid cloud of disapproval settled over the dripping girl, more chilling than the April breeze. Her high spirits plunged. She had made herself ridiculous. How many times had her grandfather cautioned her to think before she flew off the handle? She drew her knees and elbows tight under her red cloak and clenched her teeth to keep them from chattering. Water dripped off her matted hair and ran in icy trickles down her neck. Then, glancing defiantly from one hostile face to another, Kit found a small measure of comfort. The young man in the black hat was looking at her gravely, and all at once his lips twisted in spite of himself. A smile filled his eyes with such warmth and sympathy that a lump rose in Kit's throat. and she glanced away. Then she saw that the child, silently clutching her sodden doll, was staring at her with a gaze of pure worship. That is a selection from The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. It was written back in 1958, and it won the Newbery Award in 1959. It's more of a contemporary classic. However, I feel like it has very modern themes. Its setting is in the late 1600s, in a colony in Connecticut. That's where most of it happens. Kit Tyler, the main person in the story, is a girl who's 16 years old. She was raised in Barbados during the late 1600s, which was basically known for sugarcane plantations. She's sort of a product of her experiences. She was raised by her grandfather, like being so far away from probably like civilized England and things like that. He didn't really raise her with some of the same boundaries that women of the time, or limitations, I suppose, that women of the time had. So she's very independent minded, speaks her mind, and she does not fit in for like much of the book. The Witch of Blackbird Pond, like the title, is referring to a little old woman that she meets later in the story. She's not very well known. Like people in the town people in the area don't really know who she is. And it's similar to the way that Kit is treated. Kit is treated as an outsider, and the idea of witches, this was back in the times of the like Salem witch trials and things like that. It's obviously fiction, but it was like set in that same time period. And so she's not only in danger of potentially just being an outsider and like lonely. Like Kit's not only possibly going to experience that, she also could possibly have some societal dangers because of misunderstanding who she is and what she's like. I think there's a lot of valuable lessons in it. There's strong themes of like wanting to belong and like fitting in, as well as compassion, empathy, seeing from a different perspective, not being quick to judge. There's a lot of those themes in it. Like some characters seem initially to be very harsh, and you find out later there's like backstories behind them, like why they are acting that way. It doesn't necessarily excuse behaviors, but it does sort of like help you understand where these people are coming from. It's very well-rounded characters, very well-written story. It is sort of considered usually like to be like a middle grade reader. We actually have two copies. We have one in children's and we have one in our YA classics collection. I purposely added it because I read this in middle school and loved it. I think that it is relevant to all ages, to be honest. Just for this video, I've reread it a bit and I'm still seeing things that just makes me really love the characters and the writing in this book. I just hope you give it a chance. It is not a digital book club selection, but you can ask us to try and make that happen. There's going to be a form, asking us to make it a digital book club selection, and that will be in the guide that will be available in this book, in this copy, shortly after this video. Anyways, I hope you check it out.